She's never referred to again as Joseph's wife or his betrothed or the Virgin Mary until the birth of Christ. After the birth, she's never again referred to as his wife by anyone. In fact, in 29 mentions, Mary is mentioned only 29 times after the birth of Christ in the Gospel. And she's referred to as the mother of the child or the mother of Jesus. In the specific instance where Mary and Joseph were mentioned in the Gospel of Luke chapter 2, verse 33, they are referred to as follows. And Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of. A second argument against the everlasting virginity of Mary is the misinterpretation of the 25th verse of the first chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which reads, "But knew her not," speaking of Joseph, "and to know her according to the meaning of the Old Testament means to come together as a husband and wife in a sexual connotation, until she had borne a son, and he called his name Jesus." And the people who find an argument against the virginity of Mary in this verse claim that, according to the grammatical structure of the sentence, her virginity lasted only until the birth of Christ, and he knew her not until she had borne a son. After she lived as the wife of Joseph, with whom she had other children, they say. Again, this argument is not very valid. Once a person examines this grammatical structure of the many parts of the Bible, where the word until is used in some different connotations, the word until was used there in order to make emphatically clear that she was indeed a virgin until she conceived. In other words, Joseph didn't touch her, even through her pregnancy, at no time. For those who ask the reason for the choice of this particular word, we say that it was a favorite word of the author of the Bible in reference to an unspecified time. If they wanted to establish that at no time did something happen, they used the word until in order to rule out the possibility that it ever happened. For example, in the book of Genesis, chapter 8, verse 7, "And he sent forth a raven, and it went forth and returned, not until the water dried up from the earth." Does this mean that the raven returned after the waters were dried off the earth? The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verse 20. "And lo, I am with you until the end of the age." Does this mean that our Lord will not be with his apostles after the end of the world, as he promised them? The third argument, which some present against the virginity of Mary, is the reference to several parts of the Gospel. To the brothers and sisters they say our Lord had, claiming that this is proof that Mary had children after the birth of Christ. It's true that during the first 3 centuries after the resurrection of Christ, no one had the slightest doubt that Mary remained a virgin during her entire life. Among these people were included persons who knew her and her family very closely, as well as James, who was the first bishop of Jerusalem and the so-called brother of Christ. And we ask, how could it be possible for people to consider James, their bishop, the son of Mary, at the same time call Mary the ever virgin? Nor were only the common people who believed the everlasting virginity of Mary. Such great fathers and writers of the church as Justin Martyr, Clemens of Alexandria, Origen, Eusebius of Caesarea, the author of the famous ecclesiastical history, leave no doubt in the writings that Mary lived indeed the life of a virgin from the day of her birth to the day of her mission. Yet, none of these fathers had any specific reason to develop any argument for such a belief, since no argument existed on the contrary. But at the end of the beginning of the 4th century, however, a heresy, which is a false teaching, was born in Arabia, trying to destroy the belief of the everlasting virginity of Mary. It was then that the concrete and definite explanation of her virginity and the explanation concerning the brothers and sisters of Jesus was formulated by Epiphanius, the Bishop of Cyprus, on the basis of the writings of the Fathers, which were just mentioned. The Orthodox Church accepts the explanation of Epiphanius and Holy Tradition, especially since it has been accepted and exclaimed as true and valid by such later fathers as Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, John Chrysostom, Cyril of Alexandria, Hippolytus of Thebes, Andrew of Crete, and even Hilary, Ambrose, and Augustine of the Western Church. Here then is the explanation of Epiphanius concerning the brothers and sisters of Jesus. He wrote, the so-called brothers and sisters of our Lord mentioned in the New Testament were children of Joseph by a previous wife who died before the betrothal of Mary to Joseph. The number of these brethren were 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And the following were their names: James, Joseph, Judas, and Simeon, Mary, and Salome. Joseph was 49 years old when James was born, and when he was 49, his wife, I take that back. Joseph was 40 years old when James was born. He was 49 years old when his wife passed away. At age 80, he was entrusted with the care of Mary, who already was orphaned from the age of 3, and she was dedicated to the temple. From this point on, the events take the course described in the Gospels. And the 2 practical observations provide us with conclusive proof that this explanation by Epiphanius is correct. First, that when the flight into Egypt was made necessary, 2 years after the birth of Jesus, Joseph could undertake it as well as the 2-year stay into Egypt without worries about children, since all his children from a previous marriage, they were all grown, and with Mary he had none. A further proof that no children were born to Joseph and Mary is the fact that Jesus, while on the cross, entrusted the care of his mother to John, his apostle. Why should Jesus take such a step if Mary had other children? Should he turn to John and not to his brother? A logical question also comes to one's mind as to when Mary had these children, since no mention is made of them during the stay and return from Egypt, or when Jesus was 12 and had gone to the temple. Another incredible occurrence would be that Mary did have other children with Joseph, of establishing blood relatives of God on earth. As it is, the only person to have such blood relationship with the incarnate Lord was Mary. And with her falling asleep, all relationships ceased to exist. Should all these arguments not suffice, we relate as a final place of proof that Mary lived her entire life in virginity. The following quotation from the letter of Pilate to Herod, in which Justin is quoted as follows. Justin, one of the authors of the era of Augustus Tiberius, wrote in his third book that Mary of Galilee, the one who bore the Messiah who was crucified in Jerusalem, knew no husband, that Joseph never abandoned her, but lived with her in utmost purity without knowing her as a wife, without Mary knowing him as a husband. To all the Orthodox, in evidence of all we have presented here, Mary is and shall always be known as the ever-Virgin Theotokos, who through her the utmost grace and supreme virtue became the mother and redeemer of our humanity.